The Code of Hammurabi was inscribed on a basalt stele, and the pharaoh's royal power has flowed along the Nile for millennia. The seeds of order took root amid warfare and conquest. Yet this was only the preliminary outline of the social contract. While the king's decrees maintained power, they did not allow individuals to truly have a choice. Subjects remained passive obeyers, not creators of the contract. But the waves of history did not stop there. As empires expanded, as nations and peoples intertwined, and as the bells of trade caravans echoed between silk and gold, humanity began to realize the will of the monarch alone cannot create true order. Power without regulation becomes tyranny. Society without consensus turns the contract into a tool for the strong. In this long evolution, the social contract underwent transformations and deepening stages. From the obedient relationship between the individual and the state to the right to collectively create order. Beneath the clear light of the Aegean Sea, the Parthenon stands atop the Acropolis, a lighthouse for the gods watching over the mortal world. In its shadow, the citizens of Athens gather in the public square, their voices intertwining in a wave of reason and passion. They are no longer subjects of royal power, but the creators of the city-state, co-rulers of their destiny. The embryonic form of the social contract began to take root in this marble-paved square. In the 6th century BC, Solon's reforms abolished debt slavery, freeing the citizens from their chains and allowing them to enter the council halls with their heads held high. Becoming the spokespeople of the state, Cleisthenes, through the practice of ostracism, gave the people the power to rid themselves of despots. Tyrants could no longer recklessly expand their ambitions, and power learned to tread cautiously under the watchful eyes of the public. By the time of Pericles, democracy was no longer the privilege of the aristocracy, but a contract for the free citizens of the city-state, a grand experiment of participation, consensus, and governance. However, this experiment never truly reached the ideal of universal equality. It was still a conspiracy of the few, excluding women, slaves, and foreigners from citizenship. At this moment, the social contract was still an aristocratic oath, not a universal promise for all of humanity. Athens' attempt was a dazzling flash of lightning, yet also a fragile, fleeting light. When the shadow of war covered the Aegean, and internal strife and greed tore the city-state apart, the assembly devolved into a battleground for populist struggles. In the end, Athens' spirit of freedom could not withstand the iron heels of Macedonia. Alexander the Great conquered Greece, returning the world to the control of kings. Yet the light ignited by Athens did not truly extinguish. As the legions of Rome marched across the Mediterranean, and the echoes of eloquence and debate resonated through the halls of the Senate, humanity once again sought to expand the boundaries of the social contract. This time, it was no longer confined to a single city-state, but encompassed an entire empire. In 451 BCE, the birth of the 12 tables marked a further realization of the spirit of the social contract. This code, inscribed on bronze tablets, was no longer merely the decree of a monarch, but a set of common rules for all citizens. It proclaimed to the world that law was not a mere tool of power, but the cornerstone of social order. Before the law, all are equal. Though this ideal was never fully realized, it laid the foundation for a new concept, one in which the state was no longer merely a projection of the ruler's will, but began to take shape as the product of a civic contract.
These are the words of Gaius Julius Caesar, direct descendant of Venus, proconsul of Gaul, glorious imperator of the northern legions. Citizens, I have returned to Italy with the sole intention of claiming my legal and moral rights. I have no desire for unlawful powers. I will name no man an enemy who does not so declare himself. Even so, the property of those enemies will not be appropriated, and their person will remain inviolate as long as their opposition be peaceful. Moreover, to any man that has taken arms against me and now regrets it, I gladly offer total amnesty. However, those that continue to use violence to oppose my legal rights, they shall receive that which they seek to give. Under the auspices of Jupiter Capitolinus, these are the words of Gaius Julius Caesar.
However, this transformation could not shatter the chains of the past. The Republic ultimately succumbed to the Empire. The forum of democratic debate could not withstand the force of ambition and steel. When Caesar's sword gleamed in the twilight of Rome, he not only cut through the Senate's decadence, but also reshaped the relationship between law and power. In the end, Augustus established the empire. Law remained a tool of governance, but it was no longer the expression of the people's will. Instead, it became the foundation of imperial authority. As Rome's territories expanded, law was no longer confined to the citizens of a single city-state, but began to reconcile the traditions of different cultures and peoples. When the empire stretched from Britain to the Euphrates, a new spirit of contract emerged, one that was no longer limited to a single nation, but sought to create a universal legal order. In the 6th century A.D., Emperor Justinian compiled the Corpus Juris Civilis, not merely as a codification of Roman law, but as the foundation of Europe's future legal systems. When medieval jurists pored over its pages, under the dim candlelight of monasteries, when university halls echoed with the idea that law governs power, Rome's spirit of contract was reborn. The social contract has never been merely a tool of rulers, but a declaration of humanity's continuous struggle to transcend its own chains. Greece and Rome did not deliver a perfect contract to the world, but they laid the groundwork for what was to come. From the Agora of Athens to the courts of Rome, from the flames of debate to the bronze tablets of law, humanity has ultimately learned order should not belong solely to the rulers. It must be safeguarded by the people. As the last splendor of Rome crumbled beneath flames and iron hooves, as the western winds swept up the ashes, scattering the glory of the once great empire across a desolate land, Europe descended into a long night. The war horses of the barbarians trampled upon the ruins of shattered columns, while the candlelight of monks flickered in desolate monasteries, seeking lost order in an age of darkness. Yet the spirit of social contracts was never extinguished. It transformed into another form, lying dormant in the soil of feudalism, awaiting the tides of time. On the surface, feudalism was an exchange of obligations and protection. But in reality, it was a web of power intricate and inescapable. Like a spider, the king wove this web, granting fiefs to nobles in exchange for loyalty and military service. The nobles, in turn, became rulers of their own small domains, distributing land to knights. At the very bottom of this food chain, serfs were like caged birds, bound to the land for generations, toiling endlessly with no hope of escape. This was no contract of equality, but a system that wielded dominance under the guise of promise. The king and nobles looked down from their towers of power, while the serfs struggled in the mud of the earth, power was nothing more than a game of precarious balance. The nobles gained influence through their oaths of loyalty. The king maintained his rule through feudal pledges, and the labor of the serfs was the foundation that kept this pyramid from collapsing. Yet the river of history never stands still. The chains of feudal contracts would, in time, begin to loosen. As the chimes of trade caravans echoed across Europe, as merchant convoys returned from the distant east laden with treasures and knowledge, and as markets flourished in the shadows of fortresses, a silent transformation was brewing. The rise of cities spread like wild grass across feudal lands. Guilds and autonomous municipalities forged a new order, and merchants no longer relied on nobles, but instead ransomed their own freedom with gold. A monetary economy replaced the land-centered feudal structure, allowing serfs to gain breathing room as tenant farmers. Feudal lords could no longer rule solely through land and military might. Wealth's movement subtly shifted the balance of power. The people were no longer mere petitioners seeking protection, but claimants demanding rights. When they realized that wealth could buy dignity, and that the marketplace offered more security than the lord, the very foundations of the feudal system began to waver. But change is never confined to economics. It inevitably reaches the pinnacle of power. When feudal contracts are seen as shackles by the king, when rulers attempt to place themselves above the law, the call for resistance will sound. In 1215 England, a clash of power unfolded on the fields of Runnymede, just outside London. King John, through heavy taxation and tyranny, had enraged the nobility. He sought to tear apart the feudal contract and shape himself into an absolute monarch. Yet when power oversteps its bounds, nobles and commoners alike will rise. The Magna Carta, a charter written with swords and blood, struck the first crack in the iron grip of royal authority. It declared to the world, the king is not above the law. This was more than just a noble rebellion against the monarch. It was a rebirth of the spirit of social contract. From this moment on, rule was no longer the mere expression of a ruler's rule, but was bound by law and institutional limits. For the first time in history, power was placed within the framework of a contract. The state was no longer the personal possession of a king. but a community upheld by law. The feudal system did not collapse overnight. Rather, it eroded over centuries, like a fortress gradually weathered by time. The ravages of the Black Death increased the value of labor, leading serfs to demand better conditions. The humanist ideals of the Renaissance prompted people to reconsider the worth of the individual. The tides of the Reformation challenged the notion that faith was solely the domain of kings. As the shadow of absolutism spread across Europe, and monarchs sought to reclaim their loosening grip, a new struggle emerged. Nobles and commoners joined forces to challenge autocratic rule. Parliamentary institutions rose to curb the power of monarchs. The end of the feudal contract signaled the dawn of a new contractual era, one no longer based on the exchange of land, but on a pact between the people and their rulers, founded on rights and obligations. From the Magna Carta to the Enlightenment, from feudal oaths to democratic institutions, the journey of the social contract is far from over. Like a vessel sailing down the great river of history, it carries humanity's aspirations for order and justice toward an uncertain future. The next episode, the birth and challenges of the modern social contract.